Welcome once again. Now in this second part of fifth interaction, we are going to discuss the complications of GORD. As you already know, even in the previous interactions, we have just enumerated the three important complications of gastroesophageal reflux disease. The first one is stricture esophagus, second one is esophageal shortening, the third one is Barrett's esophagus. What is a Barrett's esophagus? The columnar lined lower esophagus. If the lower part of the esophagus is the lining is columnar epithelium, that is Barrett's esophagus. Let's discuss one by one. First of all, the stricture, one of the complication of complicated gastroesophageal reflux disease. Unattended patient, ignored patient, they usually present with these three. One of them, the three complications are there. First one is stricture. Now, reflux-induced strictures, they usually occur in middle-aged persons or elderly people. But yes, in some cases we can see in children also. As these reflux-induced strictures, they occur in middle-aged and elderly people. So any middle-aged or elderly patient presenting with difficulty in swallowing and other symptoms of GORD, always rule out a carcinoma. So benign reflux induced stricture should always be differentiated with a carcinoma, malignancy in the esophagus. So how to differentiate between a benign structure or malignant structure? Benign strictures, that is reflux induced, GORD induced. So there are three important things: the location, the length, and mucosa. In benign strictures, basically the benign strictures, they are immediately above the esophagogastric junction. They are located just above the esophagogastric junction. Benign strictures, reflux induced. And short length is there. Short length of esophagus is involved. Let's say 1 to 2 centimeter length is only involved. And the esophageal mucosa is smooth if the stricture is benign. These are the three important differentiating features during upper GI endoscopy. But there is a problem. Sometimes even a carcinoma, it spreads under the mucosa, not involving the mucosa, and at its upper margin, that malignancy is present, but it is producing a benign looking stricture. Why? Because it does not have any involvement of mucosa, that is smooth mucosa is there, and just above it the benign looking stricture is produced. So it should be differentiated. A biopsy we can take and just send it for histopathology and just check it, confirm it, or rule out. Now as far as the management is concerned, these peptic strictures, they are very well managed with long-term treatment with the proton pump inhibitors. Already we have discussed this. And as most of the patients are middle aged or elderly patients, if the patient is not fit, so don't consider these patients for anti-reflux surgery, prefer proton pump inhibitors. But yes, if patient is not willing for medical treatment, this surgical intervention what we have discussed, this is available as an alternative to long-term PPI treatment. And what is required in these group of patient, the stricture, the standard operation is required. What is the take-home message for stricture management? A daycare patient is there. The same day you can discharge the patient. After dilatation, do an upper GI endoscopy, dilate the stricture, and start a proton pump inhibitor in standard doses, what we have already discussed. Second complication of GORD, is esophageal shortening. Usually this GORD is associated with if it is associated with a large sliding hiatus hernia. In this case, esophagus is short, but yes, after mobilizing the esophagus, especially the lower esophagus from the mediastinum, we can acquire a normal length. It can be restored, and then again we can follow the basic principles of surgery done for GORD. The extent to which severe inflammation in the wall of esophagus causes fibrosis and real shortening, what we have discussed in the last interaction, the extent, we cannot say 100% what will be the extent. That is less clear as of now. But yes, it could be one of the cause for esophageal shortening. If we are lacking in following the first principle of this GORD surgery, that is creation of an adequate length of intra-abdominal esophagus, then here is the option available, that is known as Colles gastroplasty. If intra-abdominal esophagus adequate length cannot be restored without tension, this Colles gastroplasty is indicated. What is this Colles gastroplasty? We'll just discuss. Let's first go with this Colles-Nissen operation. If we are doing Colles gastroplasty along with Nissen fundoplication, this is known as Colles-Nissen operation. But nowadays this Colles-Nissen operation is not done. Yes, but this Colles gastroplasty can be combined with partial fundoplication techniques, what we have today. This Colles gastroplasty basically produces a neoesophagus. It gives an extra length to the esophagus. This type of surgery can be performed by a laparoscopic as well as an open approach. We can use circular and linear staplers, and we can perform a Colles gastroplasty. Now here you can see in this slide that we have this is the esophagus. We have gone through this part of the stomach just by the side of this esophagus, cut it, then sutured, and from this place up to this place we have obtained an extra length of esophagus. So this Colles gastroplasty is creating a neoesophagus. An extra length is there, and over this length we can perform our partial fundoplication techniques, the Toupet partial fundoplication or the Dor partial fundoplication whenever required. So what is the take-home message? This Colles gastroplasty is required to increase the length of the esophagus if we need that. Then finally the third complication what we are going to discuss in this interaction is Barrett's esophagus. If the lower part of the esophagus is lined by columnar epithelium instead of a squamous epithelium, this is known as Barrett's esophagus. There is a metaplastic change in response to chronic gastroesophageal reflux disease. These type of patients, they do not present with severe symptoms, but yes, on investigation they have most abnormal pH reports. On 24-hour pH monitoring, most of the reports are abnormal in these type of patients, the Barrett's esophagus. What is the hallmark? The hallmark is presence of intestinal metaplasia, and the Barrett's epithelium, they contain a mucus secreting goblet cells in the lower part of the esophagus. There is proximal migration of squamo-columnar junction. As you all know that almost the whole of the esophagus, that is lined by squamous epithelium, and at the junction of esophagus and stomach there is squamo-columnar junction, and below that junction there is columnar epithelium of the stomach. So if that squamocolumnar junction is migrating proximally towards the cranial end, that will lead to Barrett's esophagus. And this is not clearly known that why some patients only develop esophagitis, the inflammation of esophageal mucosa in the gastroesophageal reflux disease, whereas other patients they do develop Barrett's esophagus in gastroesophageal reflux disease, not having any signs of esophageal inflammation, not known clearly. In Barrett's, the junction between squamous esophageal mucosa and gastric mucosa, it moves proximally, as we have already discussed. In the upper GI endoscope, it is very difficult to differentiate between a Barrett's esophagus and a tubular sliding hiatus hernia, because both of them they often coexist. So if we want to differentiate, then how to identify it? The solution is the site. Focus on the site where the mucosa, the gastric mucosa coming from the cardiac end, the cardia of the stomach, where that fold ends. Just focus on that side. The mucosa in the body of the stomach, that is having longitudinal folds, whereas the columnar lining of Barrett's esophagus, it is smooth. This is the basic difference between, and this point we can utilize in differentiating these two conditions during upper GI endoscopy. In Barrett's esophagus, the strictures, the esophageal strictures, they nearly always appear at the new squamocolumnar junction, the proximally migrated squamocolumnar junction in Barrett's esophagus. And rarely, very rarely, due to healing of Barrett's ulcer present in the columnar segment of Barrett's esophagus, the stricture may develop. And it has been proved that due to intestinal metaplasia, there is almost 25 times increased risk of adenocarcinoma of the esophagus. Now, how to differentiate between Barrett's ulcer versus esophagitis? In esophagitis, yes, during upper GI endoscopy, we can take the biopsies from there. In esophagitis, only inflammation will be there, but squamous epithelium will be there. In Barrett's ulcer, yes, columnar epithelium will be there along with inflammatory signs. You may have component of carcinoma also in Barrett's esophagus sometimes. Then what is the role of surveillance endoscopy? Just remember, the adequate is every 2 years, any patient having features of GORD with the features of Barrett's esophagus on upper GI endoscopy, every 2 years interval, just advise the patient to go for upper GI endoscopy and take the multiple biopsies to rule out any dysplasia every time. And this multiple biopsies, they are going to help us to rule out dysplasia as well as the in situ carcinoma. Although annually these type of patients, they usually undergo upper GI endoscopy, but yes, if you're doing at every 2 year interval, it's okay. These type of patients, they are usually not diagnosed early, because most of the patients, they are just taking proton pump inhibitors, and slowly the epithelium that is being columnar in Barrett's esophagus, now it is having features of carcinoma in situ. Then the patient presents late with invasive cancer without any preceding reflux symptoms. So these type of patients are usually not diagnosed early. So take home message, if you are suspecting any GORD patient with Barrett's esophagus, the role of surveillance, what we have discussed, surveillance endoscopy, that is important. It should be regularly practiced. Now, how to identify this Barrett's esophagus? It it is diagnosed if there is any intestinal metaplasia. Any tissue of intestinal metaplasia is there, the columnar epithelium in the esophagus, we can label that patient as Barrett's esophagus. It has been seen that relative risk of malignancy, it increases with increasing length of abnormal mucosa. Previously, it was just a rule that not at least 3 centimeter of columnar epithelium should be there to label any patient as having Barrett's esophagus. But nowadays, even a small length of or any tissue of intestinal metaplasia is there, we just say that this particular patient is having Barrett's esophagus. So in the management of Barrett's esophagus, we are having three important terms. One is classic Barrett's, when the columnar epithelium is 3 centimeter in length or more than that. Then short segment Barrett's, if the length is less than 3 centimeter of columnar epithelium, that is called short segment Barrett's. And the third term is cardiometaplasia, when the intestinal metaplasia is there at the esophagogastric junction, although we cannot see any macroscopic change at endoscopy in lower esophagus. That is known as cardiometaplasia. Intestinal metaplasia is there. How we can identify that? Obviously by taking multiple biopsies from that side during upper GI endoscopy and just confirm it histopathologically. So classic Barrett's, short segment Barrett's and cardiometaplasia. 3 centimeter or more than 3 centimeter. The second one is less than 3 centimeter. And the third one is metaplasia is there without any macroscopic change at endoscopy. The management of Barrett's esophagus is basically, we are having two important things. The first and foremost is the treatment of underlying gastroesophageal reflux disease, what we have already discussed, the medical as well as surgical part. The endoscopic methods are also available, and with the help of these endoscopic methods, we are going to ablate the Barrett's mucosa. What are the different types of endoscopic methods do we have? The first one is laser, followed by photodynamic therapy, APC treatment, the argon beam plasma coagulation therapy is there. These three things, they are going to ablate the Barrett's mucosa. And these things we can use along with the upper GI endoscope. Procedures are there. An argon beam plasma coagulation is very frequently used for this ablation. And then this endoscopic mucosal resection is a surgical technique, the endoscopic technique, with the help of which we can remove the Barrett's mucosa, the suspected mucosa that is having columnar epithelium. Along with high dose proton pump inhibitors treatment or an anti-reflux operation, these endoscopic methods, yes, they provide us with neosquamous lining, means new generation of squamous epithelium at that particular site. But yes, evidence are not confirmatory at present whether the endoscopic methods are useful or not. And why this is not confirmatory? Due to these limitations of endoscopic ablation. Even after endoscopic ablation, we may have the residual islands of Barrett's epithelium first, and that again can regenerate and just present as any complication or as well as the neoplasia, the carcinoma. The second, sometimes the buried glands, they are present beneath the new lining, the new squamous lining. Under that, these glands are there. And the third limitation of endoscopic ablation is usually the damage to esophageal wall leads to stricture. So these were the important points regarding the Barrett's esophagus and the management of Barrett's esophagus. Any query you can just write it down here. I'll try to solve whenever possible. So in next interaction, we'll further move on with other esophageal disorders. Thank you.